Hi, I'm Dave Carroll. I'm here to talk about the Journeyman Grill. Okay, so here we have the grill. This is my final project, and when I took a look at it, I had to kind of figure out where I was going to get started. So I kind of got started working on the leaves, the water leaf and the blown over leaf scroll. So these are some of my test pieces, things that I'm not going to really call them all rejects, but they're learning opportunities. So I'd learn a little bit from each one, and I'd try different techniques and different tools and see how different things worked. So this is my template for these two leaves. Once I make them all match like this, then I progress to forming the leaf. I then fold it over, weld it together to get this element. I then put a scarf on here and weld it to a piece with two corner bends on it. Okay, then this piece gets scrolled around, and it gets scrolled around like this to form these. I then take two of these elements, being careful to get the scarves going the opposite way, and weld those together to make the one large piece for the sides. And then each of those is fitted in place. So for our water leaves, I kind of struggled with just getting them to where I was happy with them. So I tried some early leaves, and some of them had points on them, and some of them were very blunt. I ended up going with a blunter leaf, so it's a little more round at the end. I like that. I did for a while experiment with some much tighter, closer leaves. But that really was kind of a sidetrack, so I came back to this. And at this phase, I did actually bend a few of them over trying to get the fit right. This one actually worked better on that, but I didn't like the leaves. So I tried a lot of these before I got one that really fit. So for the water leaf, the first thing I would do would make the compound curves, not the ripples. We'll come back and do the ripples later, but I do the compound curves. To do that, I made this little jig. I hold this part in the vise, and then I can work on this side. So before I could make the leaves, I had to make my leafing hammer. And it's one of those things, before I could make the hammer, I had to make the tools to punch and drift the eye for the hammer. So it's kind of like a math project where you have to show your work. The leafing hammer is used to form both parts of the leaf, both the compound curve and the veins. To form the veins, I also use this tool, and you notice the hammer fits into it nicely. And again, this tool I had to make. All the tools I had to make myself, and that's where a lot of the learning comes in. And as you're making tools, I even made the tongs to hold the pieces. And then I kind of focused next on this welded collar. And to do this, it turns out you need a number of tools, both bottom tools and top tools. So I made tools. And here's the bottom tool, fits in the hardy. Here's the matching top tool that is weathered, and you hold on top of it. So before I made this top tool, I had to make tools to make it. So I made a template first. The template is made a lot by chiseling in at first, and then actually a lot of hand work to get it as smooth and round as I could. You may notice it's a little bent because usage was rough on it. So then this template was used to help manufacture the bottom tool and the top tool, and that helped me fit it together. It wasn't just those tools. I also made this tool to help me set that center piece.
How easy was that to make?
This was actually, okay, how easy was this to make? The first one of these I ever made came out horrible. All the metal went to one side and it wasn't square, and I learned a lot. I threw it away and the next one came out much better. One of the items I underestimated was the upset square corners. I've done those in class. I figured, okay, not a big problem. But as I started working with them, I did a couple things wrong. First, I actually made them 90-degree corners. And that meant first thing I had to do was open them up a little bit, and I tended to get a little bit of cracking in some of the corners. So, don't forget your basics. Watch your corners right from the start, and don't, you avoid doing that. The other thing is, if you notice this early, you know you're not gonna end up using it. The only reason to go on any further is to get experience doing the other stuff with maybe a piece that you're not going to use anyhow. Gain some experience and then set it aside. When I was working on the welds, I needed information on kind of how to do it, and on this whole process of how to fold it over and things like that. I found resources online from some of Mark Asbury's articles, and even in his book, that talked a lot about how to do this specific thing and how to work out some of the math on it. It really is kind of amazing. You do the math and hey, it does work. On some of the welds, well, the center weld in particular, it was a little stressful because I'd invested quite a bit of time in two pieces that I now forge welding together, and a little stressful there for me. These pieces I've actually bent this inside radius, and I stopped doing that because you can't weld this on the anvil well. It just won't fit. So I leave them flat and I make the weld and then I bend them afterwards. Much easier. So here's another sample piece. Actually turn it for the front. You can see it wasn't quite finished. It never got quite that far. There's some bumps in the curve and stuff. But again, I learned a lot getting this far. I got the weld down. It blended nicely, and I learned a lot. This piece you now would fit into your frame, and you would come in and do a lot of tweaking at this point. And I learned some things that everybody's going to say, oh, that's easy. But you get it in here, you get it all tweaked, you put it in the fire, you get it in here, it's just fitting, and you go, great, nice and tight, I'm done. You set it down, you walk away, it cools down, you come back and it's loose. The frame was put together with tenon joints at 3 spots along the top and the bottom. This was a little bit tricky because I was so close to the edge of the metal. So when I punched my hole, what I actually did is I left a little bit more metal, I punched the hole, and then I would cut the metal off afterwards. The tendon, I kind of let it be a little bit towards the inside to give me a little bit more metal on the outside to hold it all together. Then I countersunk a hole and flattened it. To make it square, I had to make sure that each of the poles were the right length. So what I do is once I'd driven or created the tendon on each side, I'd lay them right next to each other and make sure they matched very evenly. And it was more critical that they matched each other than match the actual dimension, although I watched the dimension very closely. The scrolls were set into the frame by drilling and tapping and countersinking screws. We have to join it in the center with a large collar. This collar is about 1 1/8 across and has a little bead in it designed just to drive you crazy. So the first job was to make the collaring material. To do that, we used 5/8 inch square and we'd run it through a bottom swedge, which we made. To make the bottom swedge, what I started with was a flat swedge. I took a piece of the size I needed for the inside, 3/8 inch, and I drove it into a swedge so I had something like this. This happens to be 1/2 inch, but you get the idea. I then took a piece of 5/8 inch square, I laid it down on the diamond to fill the bottom, and I hammered it in. Then I took this piece, I cleaned up the edges a little bit, I got this cold, I got this hot, and I took this on top and I hammered it down into the bottom swedge. That gave me this. So you can see I had to do it both ways to kind of get it centered. This then produces much nicer stock than this. Now that I'd have stock, I would take that and I would bend it into my collar pieces. To do that, I had a little jig I would use in the vise to clamp it like this. These wires simply keep it from falling through the vise before I have it clamped. I would clamp it like that. I would then take a set hammer I made and I would hammer it over, and that's how I would form this piece. I would then take the U-collar piece and put it in these special jigs I made that would fit in a vise. This would allow me to adjust for the small nuances of difference in each piece. But I could put it in like this, have it red hot, drop the collar in there, put the whole work in top of it like this, take my set hammer and fold it over. And that's how I closed up the vise, or the collar. Once I got it folded over and my heat was gone, I'd lost the heat, I still had a little bit of gap. I had a little hole under here that was about 1/8 of an inch. So I took an oxyacetylene torch and heat it up, first one side, and then I'd work it down, then the other side, and I worked it down until I got a nice tight grip. This was all done while it was still in the vise, so it was keeping the sides from bowing out. You can see we did a lot of work going into this, and now that I'm done, I look back on it and I say, I'm really happy I chose this grill to do. I learned a lot. I learned things that I wouldn't have learned if I'd chosen the other grill or my own style. And I learned a lot about tooling, and not just how to do this grill, but how to make the tools, different approaches to use to get other projects done. I encourage you to give this grill a try.